mean,
Hello.
hello.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm all right, thank you. You?
Yeah, good. Just the two of us today.
Is John not coming?
John Boy's on holiday.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And Jerome won't be here today because he's doing my work.
He's doing your work.
Yeah, he's with the clients.
Oh. It's just the three of us. Nice t-shirt.
Stripy one, it's my prison one.
I like that.
I just escaped from prison. Sorry about last week.
Don't worry at all.
Ugh.
How is the mouth?
Yeah, like what happened was, because I was meant to have the big work done last week, which is all six. I have to have 6 teeth removed on the bottom because my gums are not good. So then they're going to remove the 6 teeth and put a plate in. But then I went last week because that was what they were meant to do last week. And then they had taken a mold the week before. And they said that the mold wouldn't fit in my mouth if they didn't remove 2 other teeth. So I had 2 other teeth removed last week, and then I was meant to go back tomorrow, but we've got our retreats next week. So I'm going to do the big work after that. Fun and games.
Ooh.
But I psyched myself up last week for having all the other teeth done. And then I went in and they're like, no, we have to remove these 2. So...
Oh, I'll take them all out now.
Just do it. Yeah.
So just an extra visit to add.
Of course.
But yeah, it wasn't fun because it was 2 of the big back teeth. So instead of like filling them, they took them out. So then there'll be 6 and then 2, and then they fasten it behind over there. So amazing what they can do these days. What are you eating?
Porridge
Oh, yummy.
with blueberries and raspberries
Oh, very posh.
and lots of cinnamon. Cinnamon in it.
Blueberries.
Oh, blueberries and raspberries.
Are they fresh ones?
No,
No.
they're frozen ones, but they are ours, but frozen.
Oh, so they are yours. That's what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah, they are ours. Yeah.
So organic.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah.
So how have you been since the last session? What's been going on? Because what I want to do today is kind of like a bit of, I sent you the diagrams, didn't I?
Yes, I printed them off.
Yeah. So I'd like to go through those just to help with, because I realized that the echoes exercise was quite intense.
Yes, it is.
So what I've done with these handouts that I printed out was just to kind of like help us deal with the bubbles. So it's kind of like more like a Q&A and looking at that so that we can use it moving forward when stuff comes up, if you know what I mean.
Okay, yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. So how were you since the last session?
Well,
Yeah.
it took me a really long time to get started because I thought this is going to be really difficult and it's also going to be really painful.
Yeah.
However, there was something quite therapeutic about kind of forensically looking
Yeah.
at my timeline and then about the house,
Yeah.
what is inside my house, and then what I show other people. Because I don't actually think about that, I do it automatically.
Yeah.
So to actually indulge myself to think about how I present and what I am actually feeling in my little safe bubble in my box,
Yeah.
it was quite a therapeutic process to actually drill down into that, oddly.
Oh, that's really good. That's very, very good, because it's starting to give you kind of like awareness of sometimes where conflict, we have that internal conflict of what we're feeling and what we're seeing inside and what we're showing the world. And sometimes the two don't match. So we can have, like when we're on our own, we have that internal conflict. But when we see it on paper, we can kind of like make more sense of it and get a better understanding of it, because it's not just in here. Because when it's in here, it's all jumbled up with everything else, and it's constantly creating tension and emotion in the body, which then makes us feel out of sorts. And then we do even more on the outside to cover up what's in the inside. And then there's even more conflict. And then we go up here. So when we put it down and we kind of like look at the timeline, there's almost, like you say, it's therapeutic. There's almost like a bit of a sense of relief, because it gives us an understanding. It's like, okay, that's why I'm potentially feeling this way. So this is when we were saying, I think at the beginning, when we kind of like, we're working on a process of detachment so that we can get it out, to see it for what it really is. You know, another metaphor that I like to use, it's a bit of a crude one, but it's like vomiting out on paper and then picking out the carrots. We've got to get everything out at first, in order for us to do that. So that's good that you found it therapeutic, because sometimes, yeah, it can bring up stuff which can make us emotional, but then also as we kind of like get into it and we start seeing it on paper, it helps us to do a little bit more. So that's a very good insight. Well done. And you, Tash?
I did. I started off with the balancing of the chakras, the one that really resonated with me.
Yeah.
And it really hit home with, why can't I do anything right?
Yeah.
So it brought up, I don't like to get anything wrong.
Yeah.
Which then relates back to torture and abuse for getting something wrong.
Yeah.
And then the limiting beliefs around that was, well, I can't do anything. Everything I do is wrong, so I'm not going to bother to do anything, which was quite an interesting one. Was that?
Yeah.
I feel like that holds me back personally and also businessy.
Yeah.
As well. I also put down here defensive when sharing stuff. I do, because I'm then ready for an answer. I'm ready with an answer back. So I become snappy and bite back at them.
Okay.
Yeah. And then it also brought me to awareness that I'm always asking for guidance and giving my personal power away due to the disbelief in myself.
That's a good one. And how did it make you feel to see those on paper?
It was almost like I vomited.
Yeah.
It was just like a light bulb moment came on. It's just like, oh my gosh, now I understand it.
Yeah.
yeah, it was just like an epiphany moment, actually. It was just like, yeah, now I understand it. I'm realizing that I can be confident and full of energy and believe in myself a lot more, because
Yeah.
I've unknowingly tested it this week.
Okay.
Very subconsciously gone, oh, well, I did that because I was full of confidence. And then I've realized why it went well, because I was full of confidence, but I didn't intentionally get filled more with confidence.
Yeah.
Makes sense. It's just like, oh, so yeah, so something has really shifted. I spent a day crying, which was wonderful. Not at all.
Vomiting from the eyes.
So yeah, so it's really quite interesting. And then the other thing that I wanted to share with you, just I might be changing the subject slightly.
That's all right.
Meeting the other day, and I was challenged when someone was speaking about goal setting. And then I sat with that, and person was sharing the 12-week process in a year, get more done in 12 weeks. I don't know whether you read the book. Get more stuff done in 12 weeks than you would in 12 months.
Yeah.
Goal setting and everything else. But I felt like he was telling me what to do. I don't
Okay.
get told what to do, I realise. I realise I don't like to be told what to do.
And what happens if you do get told what to do?
I get impatient, and I also rebel and go, well, you're not telling me what to do. Almost like I get angry with it, or yeah, I get angry with the person. So then I don't do anything because they've told me what to do. So it's interesting when Samuel and I work together.
Yeah.
Because obviously in the past, I've gone to him and gone, well, give me guidance so I'm not getting it wrong, because then, not that he ever does, but then I won't get punished. And then I get challenged for him telling me what to do.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole cycle of it. So then I just don't do so much. And especially around males, I realised. So yeah, so if the males are telling me what to do, my hackles and my wall comes up in my house.
Yeah.
I go, oh, okay. I don't want to do that. So that's like my house. I put all my house in. But yeah, it was just like, I want to keep in the safe zone, so I won't do stuff. So yeah,
Okay.
interesting one. And also, whilst we was on the subject of the meeting with the goal setting, I'm already doing lots. Now you want me to do more. I went deep inside with my hips and my legs. Had a little journey with them.
Yeah.
And I've noted down pain. Oh, it's in a different book I haven't got. I've noted down when the pain is the highest.
Yeah.
On my hips and my legs. And what is the circumstance or the situation that the pain increases, whether it's food, so I'm doing food journal, but also emotional and mental and physical activities around that. So yeah, so when I'm being told what to do, my pain increases.
Okay.
Yeah. And also when the thing of I'm already doing so much, how can I do more?
Yeah.
Pain really does increase. Almost feels like I'm not being supported in something. Like I am doing everything. I don't like to use those words. I'm doing everything. with you're just telling me to do lots more stuff.
Yeah.
And then that brings up the anger and the impatience.
Yeah. So can you see, I just want to bring something to your awareness. Can you see how the two can be in conflict, because you don't like to be told what to do. And then there is this underlying belief that I can't do anything right. So if someone tells you to do something to do, it's an opportunity for you to not do something right. And then you get snappy back. So the two can be interlinked, because one is triggering the other, but also something else. But it's triggering, like if you have to do something, then all that other stuff is coming up. Like, why can't do it? I can't do anything right. Am I gonna get this wrong? You get defensive. You feel like you're giving your power away because you're not making the decision of what to do, and then you rebel back. So there can be a little bit of cross, do you know what I mean? Cross contamination.
Yeah.
So it's just it's an interesting insight. So what you can do on that as well, is, you know, you can do your timeline sort of thing around the males. So like, where in my life did this constantly happen and end up in pain? And I know you quite well, and there's been a lot of that. So
Yeah.
it can become an anchor or a trigger when someone says do this. It's not only triggering all those beliefs, or it's not only highlighting all those beliefs that are driving you, but it's also highlighting a bubble that needs to kind of like be addressed. So you could do your timeline with those, like with that as the focus. So if there's like, also with Nicola, you know, if you look at what's going on inside, do a timeline and, you know, kind of like highlight, okay, what's triggered those things, or who's contributed those things. But we'll look at that in a little bit more detail when we look at the Wheel of Life. But I think what you've done is like both of you, and what I like about this process is that we're all individual and we're going to approach it differently. So like for you, you took a look at the chakras and a little bit at the house. Whereas when Nicola was doing it, it's like, I've got this internal and external conflict. So she resonated more with the house side of things. But it's both highlighting where the external and the internal are kind of like conflicting each other. So what we want to do throughout the process, and what we will be working on, is kind of like taking a look at that internal stuff, so that it doesn't be in conflict with the external stuff. So that's not to say that we now have to show everything that's inside, but just having that awareness can help us kind of like look at it differently, and say, okay, well, is this a behavior a result of that, or am I using that to stop me or overcompensate? Because a lot of times with these sort of things, we do overcompensate on the outside. So we've got to, you know, we did that diagram, you know, where we kind of like lost our sense of self. We focus on the outside circle, so that we can really, really avoid people seeing what's going on inside. You know, and Nicola mentioned that with her house, like what's inside is different to what we show. And a lot of times we show a lot more of what's on the outside, than what's on the inside. And like you said, Tash, it's like, you know, I'm giving my power away due to asking for help, or everything is wrong, so I don't do anything. But then when you do something, you give 150% and overwork yourself. And then from a physical point of view, that can also have an impact on the pain. Because your hips and that sort of stuff, and anywhere that we have physical pain or physical tension in the body, is kind of like highlighting where we may be overcompensating. So like for me, yesterday I went to the physio because my whole back seized up. It was like I had this steel plate inside of it, and what came up was a very similar thing. It's like right now I'm trying to do everything with all 3 projects that are going on at the same time, and I don't feel supported. So I carry it all in my back to try and keep my back as rigid and upright as possible to give me some sort of support. But then the body kind of like says, well, look, you know, you're taking on too much. I'm going to communicate to you with pain. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we want to do is I want to go through the diagrams with you just to give you an insight. Can you see my program with the ladder?
Yes.
So what we're starting on now, like, you know, the journey of self-awareness is kind of like a ladder. We've got to climb up through each of those rungs or those steps. But it is also a never-ending destination. But once we get to a place of self-awareness and self-acceptance, it's a lot easier to deal with the things when they come up. So we always start at the bottom. So kind of like this is what you've been doing, is we're working on our beliefs, how we see ourselves, what we believe about ourselves. And you've both uncovered some pretty kind of like deep beliefs. What I would encourage you to do is kind of like go through those things that you've written down and come up with one core belief that sums it all up. So I'll just put my perception on what you've both shared. Like for Nicola, you know, my perception would be I'm not allowed to express what's going on inside, or something like that. And you can look at all the challenges that you have in your day-to-day life, and when you get your core belief, it's gonna resonate with the majority of your challenges. So for me, when I did this exercise, what I came up with as my core belief is it's not safe to be me, and I'm not allowed to express myself. And when I looked at all the challenges that I was having in my life at that moment, or what I was going through, that core belief for me resonated with everything. And what we're doing with this process is every step of this is going to involve awareness. But when I undercover, or when I uncover, not undercover, I don't know how you can undercover something, but when you uncover something, it gives you that awareness and say, okay, well, this belief is driving a lot of what I do. So, you know, you mentioned some good ones, Tash, so it would be good to kind of like sum those up and kind of like come up with one core belief that's something, you know, that comes up, the one that resonates with me for you is everything I do is wrong, so I don't do anything, or something like that. Or, you know, you've got a good one there, like, why can't I do anything right? Because then when you look at your challenges and say, okay, what's my challenge? Da 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 da. Oh, why can't I do anything right? Because that core belief at the moment is going to kind of like be your bottom rung of your ladder. And that can also be like ideas that we hold to be true, even if they're unproven. So a lot of these things, you know, a lot of times, because we've had these core beliefs for so long and we haven't taken time to look at, because we reinforce them constantly, we hold them true, even if they are unproven. The other one there, a lot of times, sometimes, you know, we can take a look at, you know, the things that we read, the research that we do, but also most commonly the things that we constantly think about. Because those things that we think about are going to reinforce those things that we believe about ourselves. And then also, like when you're doing your timeline and your bubbles, you can kind of like see like, okay, if I've got my timeline here, there's been these bubbles that in the past may have defined or reinforced that sort of thing. So there will be one major bubble where there is a part of us that is trapped in there, and it's trying to recreate that. But because we haven't emotionally let it go, it shapes us as we move forward. So when you get that core belief and you look at your timeline, you'll know it's like, okay, this is where it came from. And with this kind of like work, we've got to give ourselves permission, and it's not natural for most of us, but we've got to give ourselves permission to blame somebody. And that's not to be a victim, but it is just to acknowledge that at that point in time, I was doing the best that I could, and someone interfered with it. And often it's that first step of the ladder that is the most difficult step to take. Because with the ladder of self-awareness, like, we don't always see the top when we start. It's almost like Jack and the Beanstalk kind of thing. You know, he was very nervous when he started climbing it, and he didn't know where the top would lead him. He just saw that it was going up, up, up. So the very first step, and like we've seen from the first two sessions, can be difficult to take. It's a bit messy. You know, we slowly start to find our feet. But I'm glad that you've done the work that you've done, because there's been some sort of personal insights where you go, okay, I can understand why I'm doing X, Y, Z, you know, and that sort of thing. The next thing that we move up to from our beliefs will form our values. And at the moment, we may not be fully aware of our values, but we definitely are aware of what I like to call anti-values. So anti-values are also things that drive us. If I value, let me take a look at these. I'll just use the term self-expression, because it, like Nicholas said, kind of like what I show, and Tash mentioned, you know, I can't get things wrong. So there's also an element of expressing yourself through your cooking. If we are not sticking to our values and doing the things that we believe that we should be doing, and there is inaction, or if there is tension or charge, it means that we're operating from an anti-value. And an anti-value is kind of like a negative value that holds us back from being hurt. So if I show what's going on in the inside of my house, I may potentially be hurt. If I do the things that I want to do, I may get them wrong, and that means that I will be judged. So we're being driven at the beginning of this process more by our anti-values than our values. Does that make sense?
I think so, yes.
Our values will also be what we stand for, and that can sometimes be seen by some of the things that we show when we do have the courage to show what we do. There are also standards and principles that guide your decision, so that guide your decision-making process. So again, we can look at what you've uncovered through the houses and that sort of stuff, and that will kind of like show us that right now I'm operating from these standards and principles. So there could be a standard or a principle that I'm not allowed to show what's going on the inside, or I can't do anything right, so therefore I don't do anything. And your values will be your life compass. When we start off, we get to a point where we are not happy, and that's why we choose to embark upon a journey like this. And when we are not happy, we could be being directed by our anti-values or the things that give us charge. So that's the process that we are working through. That's not to say that later on we're not going to work on them, but I just want to do this ladder to show the process that we are going through. We then move from our values into our attitudes, and our attitudes are kind of like the labels that we've defined by how we express our values or anti-values through words and actions. And sometimes it can also be non-action or non-verbal communication. How we make decisions. So sometimes if we're operating from these anti-values, it can be very difficult to make a decision. So I'll just use Natasha's example because she mentioned it quite clear. It's like, you know, one of the decisions that could be coming from an anti-value is don't tell me what to do. Because when we've made that decision and someone tells us what we do, I get impatient or I rebel, my pain increases. It then means that I have to do something that potentially I might get wrong. So that will then define your decision-making process. And those attitudes at the moment will define your approach to and your outlook on life. So, you know, that can relate back to the circle that we were talking about, you know, the outside circle, which is the masks that we show the world because we've been taken away from our authentic self. That's going to determine my approach to an outlook on life. And that one you can do kind of like a little bit of writing. You can just write down the heading life is, and then just write everything that comes up for you. You know, so it could be life is difficult, life is challenging, or whatever, but you need to take a look at the actions that you are taking now, because it's easy for us to say life is an adventure, but if we truly had that attitude and that outlook on life, we would be doing things that bring us adventure without having to force it.
It's very clear, because we all say, oh, like our values are, I don't know, like compassion, love, and they're almost like make believe values.
Yes.
That a lot of people go, or people would resonate with those values, whereas actually our values are very different
Yes.
in the true sense of,
Yeah.
when you say, think about what you think, what do I always think about,
Yeah.
is a very different thing than what I think my values are.
Yeah.
It's just
Because a lot of times we take on values that we think other people think that we should have.
yes.
So when and later on there's some exercises where we look at values and we take a look at, you know, potentially we have got our current values from, and then from there we start to change them a little bit. So when I did, where's my note? I'm just looking for my other notebook.
Jerome, can I? Oh, it's not Jerome. It's
No, it's Gareth.
It's Gareth. It's thrown me
With
out.
Jerome.
Gareth with Jerome's name on it. Yeah.
Oh, have I not changed my name?
No, that's true again. I knew who you were, but you said the wrong name. May I ask you,
I forgot to change it.
the values and anti-values, would your anti-values be that you're shaped by the person that you don't want to be through your own experiences? So, for example, I want to be a different parent to the way that I was parented, so I overcompensate. I want to be a better partner to the way that I might have had a partner in the past, so I overcompensate and want to be a much better person because of bad stuff that's happened. Is that an anti-value?
Yes, that's a perfect example, because inside your house, you'll have, and this is just my projection, inside the house, you'll have I'm just putting my words on it, you'll have the value that I'm not a very good parent, so I've got to show that I am. And that anti-value, like sometimes we then will overcompensate on I am a good parent. Whereas when we're aware of our anti-values, we can then kind of like start changing it moving forward. So that kind of like is an example of an anti-value. So when I did this exercise before, and the process that I went through was I had an anti-value without realizing it, that I wasn't allowed to express myself. And if I expressed myself, I would get in trouble. So then when I did express myself, I really overcompensated. Whereas now I've worked on my anti-value and I've understood who I learned it from, and I've given it back to them. So now it is easier for me to express myself because I know that I am allowed to express myself. Another one for me was that it's not safe to be me. So kind of like similar to what Natasha said, is like sometimes, you know, her pain increases when people want her to do more, but because she's afraid of doing mistakes, it highlights the pain. So it's been driven more by the I'm already doing a lot and people want me to do more, but on the outside she's showing, well, look how much I'm doing, because I know from knowing Natasha that she does a lot. In my opinion, and it's not for me to say, but really I can. In my opinion, she does too much. And the reason that I say that is because Natasha and I, on some levels, are very, very similar. So I also do the same thing. I push until my body kind of like tells me, you know, I have my back problems and hip problems as well. And it's my body saying, well, you're pushing really hard against an anti-value. And then, you know, when I did mine, I realized through doing the exercises that we're going to be doing later on, that one of my top value is rebellion. But for me, rebellion is truly expressing myself and not being afraid to be different. There are some topics that I can be quite fanatical about, because one of my other values is passion. So when I operate from those places of passion and rebellion, which for me kind of like sums up self-expression and that sort of stuff, I can now do it very, very naturally, because for me, rebellion is just being me. I don't go with the norm of people not fully expressing themselves. But before I got to that point, I had to work on that kind of like label and belief that I was defined by, that I'm not allowed to express myself. So that's kind of like an indication of how our attitudes are built. We then go into our actions and our behaviors, which are now the physical things that we do. So these are my physical actions. So Natasha mentioned one of her ones that she mentioned was that, you know, she gets defensive and can become snappy. You know, so that's one of the ways that we act and behave. And then kind of like what we do that reflects our values, sometimes even through inaction. So again, I'm just using Natasha's ones. She mentioned about when I'm told what to do or whatever it is, I give my power away, or I don't do anything. Everything is wrong, so I don't do anything. And that's reflected by which side of the equation is heavier from our values and our anti-values. There's also there how we are influenced by others. So the influence that others have over me will also determine and dictate the actions or inactions that I take. Because inaction is also an action. It's an action to not do anything. It takes a conscious decision for me to not do anything. But a lot of times we're not aware of why we're not doing anything. But that's been uncovered by the work that we're doing as well. Sometimes it can also be conversations and discussions that you engage in. Sometimes I call this the storyteller's tea party. We can become defined by those, we can become defined by those attitudes and beliefs and that sort of stuff. And I'm not pointing Natasha out, but it's a discussion that we have. It's like, oh, my hips are sore. So those are the conversations and discussions we can sometimes engage in. So it's just to be aware of ourselves and being aware of our speech. And like I've written down there again, what we don't do, the things that we don't do. So I use my example again. One of the things that I never used to do was put out my true thoughts and what I really wanted to do. And that was being defined because my anti-values are so strong without me kind of like accepting them and being aware of them. Sometimes, like Nicola was saying, I can overcompensate on what I show to try and convince myself that I value something else. You know, so I would like sometimes in the past, I know it, and it's one that I've worked on, is I would overshare. Because if I overshared and I shared a lot, it would mean that I was XYZ. Whereas now it's kind of like, well, it doesn't matter what I share, it just is what is. So once we've worked on our actions and behaviors, what we then want to do is kind of like take a look at our social and environment, because that will also kind of like reflect some of the values and the anti-values and the beliefs that we have. It's like who you spend the most time with and who you engage with. Also where you spend your time. So for me, again, using my personal experience, where I used to spend the most of my time, or the majority of my time, was at work. Because when I was at work with the people that I work with in close proximity, I had to share from my values. Yeah, there would be elements where I was not afraid to share my anti-values, but I did spend a lot of time in my work environment to almost try and convince myself that those were my values, without being aware that there was that internal conflict. We take a look at who we speak to most regularly, because we're only going to speak to people that we resonate with on some level. And another important one is how and what you engage with online and on social media. Social media for all of us plays a big part in what is important to us. And, you know, from a technological point of view, things like Facebook and Instagram and those sort of things, even to a degree, YouTube, they will see that you watch something or you engage with something, and then more of that will show up on your news feed. So I just use some examples. Some people that I know are very what's the word? Almost fanatical about the current situation with vaccinations. So they will be constantly looking at conspiracy theories, and the more conspiracy theories that you look at, the more conspiracy theories that show up. For me, I look at a lot of like inspirational and educational stuff, and my newsfeed is filled with that. I don't engage with anything to do with conspiracy theories, because it's not that I don't believe in them, but I don't want to be sucked into them. And I've seen when I've engaged with them in the past, more and more of those kind of posts will show up on your news feed. So you can do kind of like, give yourself 10 minutes on social media and scroll through your news feed and see what sort of things are coming up. I always like to try and fuck with social media. So I will just like, every now and then I will just engage with everything. So then it just gets confused and almost says, well, what is this guy really interested in? Because I will look at, let's just use an example. I will look at a conspiracy theory, and then I will look at something that completely conflicts in it. So then it starts to kind of like mess up your algorithm. And then what happens? I get more conspiracy theories come up and I block them. I remove them from my newsfeed so that they don't show up, because quite frankly, I don't want to get involved in them. And I feel like they're a waste of time and energy. So we need to take a look at that. And what happens then from there is we can start to kind of like work on our aspirations and our personal vision and mission. And this can be tied to the conversation that Natasha was having about the goal setting. Sometimes when we're goal setting, we set goals that we think that we should be setting, and we do things that we think that we should be doing, or that we think other people think that we should be doing. So you have those things that you aim for, what you want to do in life. You get more direction and clarity when you are more in connection with your personal values. When your anti-values are driving you, it's very difficult to get a sense of direction and clarity, because it is coming more subconsciously from an anti-value point of view. You know, so I can use both examples. It's like, well, Nicola will, again, my perception and my understanding, Nicola will focus on goals and life directions that are what she wants to show. But because the inside is different and the two aren't fully aligned, it can be sometimes take a lot of energy to work on what we show. The same as Natasha. It's like, well, I've got plans for things that I want to do. I'm just going to make it flippant. I want to bake a chocolate cake. I want to bake a carrot cake, or whatever it is. But what if I get it wrong? And once you start to kind of like reconnect with what your true values are, and are aware of what your anti-values are, you get a sense of personal peace. It's like, okay, well, I have this stuff going on inside of my house. I know that it's there, but I don't have to be afraid of it, or I don't have to be ashamed of it. That sense of personal peace can often give you the courage and the strength to be vulnerable. So I know that for me, reconnecting with those beliefs and those values and those attitudes that serve me, I have a sense of personal peace, because I'm not afraid, I'm not afraid of my anti-values. And it doesn't matter if people find them out. And that gives me a great sense of, it's a very liberating feeling to say, okay, well, this is my shit. I'm very aware of my shit, because it is like that yin and yang. We're not going to be perfect. We're not going to be, you know, oh, I know my values, I know my beliefs and that sort of stuff. No, but what we are going to be is we're going to be comfortable with those things that are inside our house. We're going to find, or we're going to learn ways to make peace with them. And that's why, you know, like for me, self-acceptance and self-awareness is being aware of those anti-values and those things that are going on inside of us, and being at peace with them. So I like what Nicola said. you know, she said that she found it very therapeutic looking at her timeline. That shows that there is an element and a desire in there to change. And when we look at it, it's like almost a sense of relief. It's like, okay, I may have only written this for myself, but I've admitted it to someone. And I love what you posted the other day where you said, you know, you felt accepted without judgment. It's a safe place where we can share our anti-values and see that they're not judged, because the person that is judging them the most is me. Nobody judges my anti-values more than I do. And that's why I do so much, whether it's being defensive, whether it's overcompensating, whether it's taking on too much. Nobody does that more than me, because I internally, on some level, am ashamed of those anti-values, or I'm embarrassed if people kind of like find out. And then what that leads to is this sense of, this is me, this is who I am, take it or leave it. I'm grounded in my sense of self and where I am right now. I have a level of unconditional acceptance for myself, because through the bubbles and the timeline exercise that we do, I can kind of like see where things came from. And I was doing an exercise with someone else over the weekend where we had been working on some of the stuff. And he says, what I've realized and what has really helped me was XYZ that happened to me was not my fault, but I was made to feel that it was. And when I did it and I drew it out on my timeline, I realized, okay, this is kind of like not my fault. So I think I covered it next week. I think I covered it last week. You know, we've got to give ourselves permission to blame someone for creating whatever it was, because in that moment, they took away our power, or we gave them our power. We may not have realized it at the moment, because we always do the best that we can do with what we know. But when we start to have that unconditional self-acceptance, we start to believe in ourselves more. We start to be more aware, and we realize that it's a constant process of growth. Because when we are ready to deal with things, more things are brought up so that we can deal with them. And you know, we know who we are and why we do what we do or don't do. So when I can feel myself kind of like having these negative thoughts or whatever they were, or the anti-values, it's like, okay, I'm aware of that. Let me do something about it. And that's why I say kind of like, the workbook is not just for what we do over the course of the time that we're together. It's going to be a guidebook for in the future when things come up. You can kind of like take a look at one of the diagrams and say, okay, this is my problem, bum, 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 and get your own insight. So self-awareness is like I said there on the side, it's a never-ending destination, and it's rather a journey of exploration. And you know, like the ladder, and like I said at the beginning, the first step is always the worst, and it's always the most uncomfortable, and it's always the most challenging, because we're going where we haven't been before. And there's one note that I've written on, is that, you know, right now we don't have to get it. And I think that's an important one to acknowledge, is there may be things that you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I don't get this. I must be doing something wrong or something's not right. We don't have to get it straight away, because if you know, like Tash will do it at the farm, you plant a seed and you don't see much of what's going on for quite a while, because all of the work is taking place below the surface. So some of the things we don't get straight away, and they're going to lead to confusion, and they're going to lead to frustration. But what you have now is that tool of the echoes, and you can look at the timeline and you can say to myself, okay, maybe when did I start first feeling that frustration? Or when did I start first feeling that anger? What was it that contributed to that? What anti-value could it have created? And again, sometimes just having that awareness, it helps us to go, okay, that is where I am. So do you have any questions on that diagram?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
No. That was very well explained.
Try and share.
Mhm.
Okay, that's good.
Turn it off and go.
Yes.
How do I turn
Just,
it off?
just pass me the remote on the top. Sorry, Gareth, we're just preheating ourselves. We're baking in here. Oh,
That's all right. So I'm going to share the next one now. Bonk. And you may have seen this in kind of like a different format. Oh, why is it doing two? I don't know. Well, it's got two there. We're going to look at the circle first. And what we want to start to kind of like understand as we go through this, because it will help us when we are looking at these anti-values and those sort of things. So this I like to call our personal influence. And we start in the middle there, which is our circle of control. And those are the things that I have full control over it. Nobody else except me can control it. So these are my words and my actions, the mindset frame that I'm in, my personal state, and the present moment. Those are the only things that I have control over. I have full control over them. And when I realized that, you know, when I'm starting to go through some of these processes and it brings up thoughts and feelings, I need to, you know, realize that I'm the one that can engage with my thoughts in any way that I want. So we had that diagram of the mental proliferation of how we get our thoughts, and then it's our story of the thoughts that makes it worse. And then we got to justify it, and it's influenced by our filters and all that. That's why I like to do that diagram at the beginning, because when we have a thought, we can look at that diagram and say, okay, well, this was my thought, and then this was my story that I started to tell myself about my thought, and this is how it made me feel. An important thing with feelings is to realize and accept that feelings are not fact. Feelings are created as a result of something that happened in the past and that we've labeled it. But a lot of times, our words and actions and our mindset can reinforce those feelings and make them real in our lives and magnify them. But for me, like when I have a feeling, what I can then take a look at is my actions and my mindset and say, well, how am I allowing these feelings to influence me? Or what are these feelings doing? Because I can't think and feel at the same time. So when I think, I switch off the feeling. When I stop thinking, the feeling gets magnified. So a lot of times we're kind of like a yo-yo between the two. It may feel like they're both happening at the same time, but if we stop and take notice of what's going on in my body, I can see that I can't think while I feel. So if I was to tell yourself to think of a time that you were really happy, and when you've got that, I then want you to pay attention to the sensation in your body. And notice that when you're paying attention to that sensation in your body, your thoughts have stopped. And then when we go back up into the thoughts, the sensations go away. So when we acknowledge that we can't think and feel at the same time, but my thinking and feeling, my thinking can influence my feeling, I can then take advantage of the present moment and say, right, what am I going to focus on? My thoughts and my mindset, or the present moment where I can be with those kind of like feelings? Because when I am in control of my feelings are going to, like we saw from the circle of life, my feelings are going to influence my action or my non-action. So those are the things over there that we have full control over. We then have our circle of influence, over which we have some control. So we don't have full control over these sort of things. We have some control over who we engage with, because sometimes someone just might come up and start talking to us, and we kind of like need to engage with them, or that sort of stuff. We have some control over our career or our job or our mission, but our customers also have an influence over it. So I'm not giving away all my control, but I have an element of control to it. I can have some control over other people's opinion of me, because that's based on what I show them. But some people will like it and some people won't. So I can have an element, and that's also kind of like closely related to personal attention. I have some control over my environment, but there may be other people around me that have a little bit of an influence over it. And I do have some control over how people treat me. And this is when it comes to kind of like boundaries and all that sort of stuff. We teach people how to treat us by the boundaries that we enforce. So sometimes someone can, let's just find an example. Someone can make a negative comment that makes me feel a certain way, and my action is to not take action and say anything about it. So then what I'm doing is I'm telling that other person subconsciously, oh, it's okay for you to treat me that way. But when I realize that I have some form of control over it, I can say to that person, you've stepped across a boundary. I don't appreciate that. So it's not that we have full control, but we do have some control. And I always like to say to people is that we teach people how to treat us. So again, I will use Natasha's example because it is, something that she brought up. I'm already doing lots and you want me to do more, and I'll just say yes.
Of course, I'll just say yes.
Yeah. So we're teaching people that it's okay for them to come and say, okay, do this, do this, do this. And I'm very much, like I say, Natasha and I are quite simple. Quite simple. We're fucking Jesus. I'd love to be simple. Are quite similar is that I often don't say no. So therefore, people think, okay, well, Gareth's the go-to guy to get something done. But when I realize that I have some form of control over that, and I take responsibility for teaching people how to treat me, I can then say no.
That's interesting that you bring that up.
Say again?
That's interesting that you bring that up, actually.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, because then I use the excuse of, oh, I don't have time for that. Instead of saying no,
Yeah.
I just say I don't have time for that.
Yeah.
But then I will come back to it and go, well, I just have to make time.
Yeah.
No.
And then you end up baking fucking cakes at midnight. And then wonder why your hips are sore.
Yes.
And sometimes, like if I look at what Nicola was saying, it's like she will show a certain image outside. And I think when we first spoke, Nicola, let me just look. It was kind of like I'm always doing, it feels self-indulgent for me to spend time on myself.
Yeah.
Because we have, in one way or another, taught people that we will always put them first rather than ourselves.
Always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we've taught people that, Nicola's the one that will do that for us.
Yeah. She never says no.
Yeah.
Until now.
Yeah. And that's why I like what you said at the beginning, is you didn't mention anything about self-indulgence. You kind of like said, well, I found it very therapeutic to do this exercise. And to me, what you are really saying behind that is like, wow, I find it therapeutic to put myself first.
Yeah, and just to give myself a little bit of space
Yeah.
to think about it, rather than
Yeah.
shoving it to one side and go,
Yeah.
I'm okay, I'm fine.
Yeah.
That's what I always do.
And one thing that I'd like you to acknowledge, that is a really, really big shift in a very short space of time.
I feel like something's moved.
Yeah.
I can't articulate what it is, but I do feel like there's been some sort of shift.
Yeah. And that's it's just for you to kind of like take stock and kind of like write in your journal. It's like, well, me, because that can start to become a new core belief. It's like me taking a little bit of time out to focus on myself is therapeutic. Because what you're then doing is you're strengthening that bottom rung of your ladder. It's like, okay, in order for me to climb this ladder, I need to do some therapeutic stuff. So it's just for you to kind of like acknowledge and hear that that is an incredibly big shift in a very short space of time. Because a lot of people, and I know that will be there will have been an element of difficulty in it, but a lot of people find it very difficult to start putting themselves first. So that's something really big to acknowledge. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. We then go into our circle of concern, which is the outside. And that's things that we don't have any control over. But, and this is a very, very big but, it's often the circle that we give the most attention to. So we will constantly try and change our past, or we'll constantly try to make sure that we behave a certain way to influence the actions of strangers. We'll do as best as we can to control our external environment. The weather, we love to complain about it, even though we have no control about it. We have no control over media and what media portrays, but we get caught up in it, because we're focusing on it. We don't have any control over our social media followers, because they will write and say whatever they want to write and say. Things like religion and politics, again, we have no control over that, but a lot of times we focus on it. And the actions of others, if I behave a certain way, then I believe that people are going to act a certain way. So we will constantly be, what's the word? Because we don't want anyone to see what's going on inside the house, we constantly shapeshift. So what we change, what we show changes from group to group. So if I'm with this group of people, then I need to show that. If I'm with that group of people, then I need to show that. If I'm with that group of people, then I need to show that. Because what I show them is going to influence how they treat me. And again, the future. We often try and control the future. So I'm going back to Natasha's example. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to do, but a lot of times there are many coaches and people out there that put a lot of influence on goal setting so that you can influence and control your future. But when I kind of like look at it, and we'll cover it towards the end of the process, there's a difference between setting goals and putting things out there and making smaller plans. But sometimes when we focus on goal setting, it's like, there's so many different acronyms these days. I've got to set SMART goals that are specific, measurable, achievable. What's the R? I can't remember. Realistic and time bound. So I set myself this goal. It's like, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and this is how I'm going to measure. This is how I'm going to measure it. And this is how I'm going to record it. And this is when I want to have it achieved by. So I'm already setting a plan for my future. But when I kind of like, we take the iceberg and we flip it upside down, and we start working from that. And it's not so much, trying to influence my future, but I want to take back a little bit of control over my iceberg and direct it as best I can with the current or the flow of life around it. So like it said there, this is just something for you to spend a few moments pondering on, which circle, or you could also circle individual things and say, okay, these are taking up most of my time. So for me, I'll use some of my examples in the past where I was spending more focus, and that was on the future, social media followers, and also to an element, I was worried about others' opinions of me, rather than going into the middle and saying, okay, this is what I can control. And it's a lot easier when you work from the middle, because it has a ripple effect out. But because we have kind of like started the journey up the ladder of self-awareness, and we've become comfortable and accepting of what's inside our house, these other things in the outside circle don't really bother us that much. We're still gonna, we're human. I'm not gonna say, oh, this is all gonna magically go away, but I'm going to be aware of it, because when I'm focusing on those things, it's going to create a feeling. And when I realize that I have a control over my feeling, I can bounce up and down and say to myself, okay, well, what thoughts am I having? What is creating this feeling? And then when I'm aware of it, it's like, okay, this is what I can change. Make sense?
Yes.
Questions?
Questions? I don't think I have any questions. I do have a question, actually. Going back to the people that we surround ourselves with.
Yeah.
I can't find where it is now, whether it's in the ladder or whether it's in the circle. But I also have an influence, like at work as well. So I have people around. I work at the Hope Centre. It's a very environment and a very different people that I'm surrounded with to the people that I'm surrounded with at home.
Mm.
So does that have an influence of my, I don't know where I'm going with this. So I don't know. Ignore me. I have no idea where I'm going with this.
Does it have an influence on the labels that you give yourself?
No, I don't think it does.
Yeah.
I think, like where you spend the social and environment, who you spend time with and how you engage in that.
Yeah.
So I spend 16 hours a week surrounding myself with people who are homeless or have addictions and things like that. So does that actually have an impact on my ladder?
Yes, in a positive way. Because it is like, the thing with values is not everything is going to be an anti-value. So one of your values is helping other people. So you're surrounding yourself with people that you are making an effort to help. So you do it because it's important to you, not because you feel like you have to, but because you want to.
Yes.
So that's why for me, I kind of like disagree entirely with what they say in the personal development world, that you are the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. Because if you were to, let's just use you an example, it's like, okay, well, I spend a lot of time with homeless people. Does that mean I'm going to be homeless? I'll just take Jerome as an example. Jerome spends most of his time with Miriam and his 2 kids. Does that mean that he's going to be defined by them? No. So I just think that, that's why I look at that, the conversations and discussions that you engage in, because, you know, sometimes I use the metaphor of like, we spend time in a storyteller's tea party, where we all sit down around the table and say, oh, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me. But if I'm being surrounded by people that are, and I'm just going to use this in inverted commas, or use the personal development terms, if I spend time around people that are less advanced than me, I'm not going to grow. No. I feel that I grow them when I'm self-aware. I grow because I can learn a lot from them about myself, because the conversations that I have with them are going to trigger feelings and emotions with me, and feelings and emotions are the way that my body communicates something that needs to grow and evolve. So, you know, I would look at that and say, no, you're surrounding yourself with those people because it's important to you. And it's the same, like, you know, I think when Nicola wrote her introduction, one of the things that really resonated with me, that you either spend time, or you've spent time in the past working with the Samaritans.
Yes, still do.
Yeah. So, you know, if you think of kind of like, you know, yes, you're surrounded by other people that do the same thing, but if you think of the majority of the conversations that you have during the day, the majority of them are going to be negative, aren't they? But because one of your values that you operate from in that sort of stuff, you know, inside your house, there may be an element of, I've been hurt, I wish someone had helped me. And then outside, you're showing the flip side of that. It's like, I want to help people that are hurting.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, I could, if we use that kind of like that personal development thing, I'm just going to use terms. Nicola should be depressed and suicidal, because that's all she's talking to all the time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But sometimes, and it's the same with me, like I, you know, speak a lot to people who have been affected by suicide, who deal with depression, who are overweight, who are unhappy, who are totally burnt out. I'm not that, but it's coming from a place of one of my values. But what I found in the past, when I wasn't 100% congruent with my values, I couldn't draw the line of when I stopped doing that and focused on me. I became all consumed by doing that because I wasn't comfortable with what was inside my house. So that's where we got to start looking at that, at the shift. Is like, am I doing this because, and I'm not saying that you're not doing this because you truly care. Am I doing this because I truly care? Or am I doing it to severely cover up an anti-value and use it to avoid me from dealing with that anti-value? Because when I deal with that anti-value, I can be more me and more present, grounded in the knowing that, okay, I have this challenge, and it makes me more human and relatable. Does that kind of like answer your question in two different ways, Tash?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have another question, if that's okay.
Yes.
And I'm sorry if this sounds like rosy.
No.
So one of my big issues is my mother
Yeah.
was emotionally and physically abusive, and with whom I have a sort of tentative relationship. But
Yeah.
when I spend any time with her, I get feelings that I don't like.
Yeah.
And I still allow her to say things to me that I would consider quite abusive. And
Yeah.
actually, I would like to run away from that relationship. But all of those outside factors make me feel like, well, you can't do that. You can't abandon your mother.
Yeah.
I haven't shared any of that abuse stuff with anybody.
Yeah.
I don't want people to think badly about her, and I don't want people to make judgments about me.
Yeah.
Every time I go back into that situation, my world implodes.
Yeah. So what we're going, this next diagram will help you with that. Because what's happening is there's that part of you that is emotionally trapped in that bubble. So every time you see your mother, because you haven't emotionally released yourself from that bubble, it's kind of like reliving it. And it's trying to kind of like make it different and hoping that it's going to be different. But because it is, the emotion is getting magnified and magnified. So it's, you know, because we're, you know, we are in control of our mindset and our words and our actions and that sort of stuff. What we kind of like want to do is kind of like release some of the negative emotion so that we can kind of like look at it. And that's why I was saying, like, when we were doing the bubbles, to give yourself permission to blame, and say it's your fault. And we'll cover that in a little bit in this one when we're kind of like dealing with the trauma. So the first two diagrams, I just wanted to show you to say, okay, this is the journey that we're on. Now what we're starting to do is working on our circle of control, because what's happening for you is you're spending time in your circle of concern and allowing your past and the environment and the actions of others to influence you. Does that make sense?
Absolute sense, yeah.
Yeah. And then what that does, it goes in, you know, you have other people's opinions of you and how people treat you, and also to an element who you engage with. And again, that influences my circle of control, because then those things I'm giving more energy to than my words, my actions, but most importantly, my mindset and the present moment. So when we look at this other diagram, and this you can use to do like a little bit of journaling on. So these are kind of like your journal prompt questions. What we first want to do is, this is what you would have uncovered when you were doing your bubbles. So this process here is what we can do when we want to pop a bubble. So like I said, sometimes when we pop the main bubbles now, other bubbles will come up when we're ready to deal with them. And we can go kind of like through this process and say, okay, well, this is how I'm going to deal with it. So we look at that and we say, okay, well, what's the trauma? What's happened? So I'll just use Nicola's example. You know, my mother treated me a certain way. Okay, so that's the trauma, and that is what happened in the bubble. Then we go to the other side there and we say, okay, well, who or what is to blame for this? So there, you know, using your example, you would simply write my mum. What we want to then go through is how it has affected me on all 4 levels. So how does it affect, how does it make me feel physically? You know, and by that, I mean, like, does your, when you go and see your mom, does your body tense up? I clench my jaws. I kind of like just put on a blank smile, or whatever it is. And then we look at the next one. It's like, how does this make me feel mentally? So what are the thoughts that you engage in? What are the thoughts that you have as a result of your mom treating this way? And that's more the internal conversation. So again, I'm just imagining how I would feel if I was in a situation like that. But at the same time, I can also use mine, because my father was very, very physically and mentally and emotionally defeated, abusive. And, you know, mentally it was like, well, you know, I'm not good enough. And I hate you, and things like that. You know, and then the feelings, it made me feel sad. It made me feel angry. It made me feel confused. And you'll see in your workbook, I'm not sure if it's here. There's this kind of like diagram with all the emotions. One day I'll put page numbers in this book. You know, and sometimes it takes the big emotions. So you'll see the big emotions. So we've got like sadness, disgust, anger, fear, surprise. You know, so there could be, like, for me, there was a lot of sadness, and I felt abandoned, and I felt lonely, and I felt guilt because I felt like I was doing something to contribute it. But it also made me feel very angry. So I felt hurt and I felt hateful. So what we want to start to do with those kind of things is kind of like, you know, the reason that I've put the emotions as one is the emotion is the chemical reaction or the charge, right? And sometimes I label that chemical reaction or charge as a feeling. So I'd say to myself, oh, I'm feeling sad. But when we look at the feelings, we can start to kind of like say, okay, well, what is it? Because it's easy for me to say that I'm sad. It's easy for me to say that I'm angry. It's easy for me to say that I'm afraid. But when we start to break it down and we start to say, okay, well, what's behind that sadness? You know, we can use the same thing. Like maybe we felt abandoned by our parents. Or maybe we felt lonely because of the way that we treated. Or the other one, like, you know, I got angry with them, or it made me feel insecure. So it's just to give us other words to use rather than the big emotions. You know, so that's emotionally. And then how did this make me feel spiritually? You know, so that can kind of like be your outlook on parents, or how it affected your outlook on life. You know, I can use some of Natasha's. It's like, why can't I do anything right? That could be how one of her bubbles has affected her. For me, what it did with me was that older, strong men will always hurt you, or dads are useless. So it created that sort of belief and spiritual approach to life. So then we kind of like look at how it affects us now and how we're dealing with it now. So you explained your own situation perfectly. It's like, well, you know, I feel, I can't remember it exactly, but when I'm with my mom, I feel distant and I feel like I want to, whatever it is. And we go through that same process. Again, how does it affect you mentally? How does it affect you emotionally? So when you go and see your mum, how does it make you feel? Does it make you anxious? Does it make you angry? Does it make you whatever it is? Because it's going to make you, you know, do you kind of like have a sense of panic, and things like that? And again, the same thing with how does it affect you and how are you dealing with it now spiritually? Because what we're doing with that is kind of like we're seeing the decisions that we've made as a result of the bubble in order for me to somehow find a way to cope with it. What we can then do is we look at those things you know, we look at the things, it's like, okay, well, as a result of this, what have I started saying to myself about myself? Or what do I tell myself about this situation? And the same thing, you know, what decisions have you made about yourself, life, and other people as a result of this? Because we will have made some decisions in order to somehow mentally deal with it. We then go now where we want to start taking back our power, because at the moment we're giving our power to other people, and we're like saying, okay, because I don't say anything, it's okay for you to treat me this way. And then when it gets too much, I have an outburst, and then that gets thrown back at me. It's like, well, look how you're behaving, because it's getting too much for us. And what we do, and this is what I always encourage people to do, is to write a letter for yourself expressing exactly those things. Like, what do you need to say to the person or the parties who are to blame for this? You know, so use my own example. Dear Dad, you're an asshole, and how dare you treat me that way? Nobody should treat a 3 or 4-year-old kid the way that you treated him. Just fuck off, so to speak. What would you say if you could say anything? So what we're doing now is I am going back into my bubble as a grown-up, knowing that my mother or my father should not have treated me that way. And I'm going back into that bubble, and I'm putting my arm around my little self when that happened. And I'm saying, okay, Mom and Dad are tied up on that chair. They can't speak, they can't respond, they can't hurt you. What would you say to them if you could say anything without them being able to respond? Because this is, you know, I'm going back to what you said earlier on, Nicola, was this is kind of like the therapeutic part of it, where you are starting to take back your power and saying those unsaid things and just getting it off your chest. Like it says there, what do you need to give yourself permission to say? So you write a letter fully expressing yourself and how you feel and whatever it is. But that letter is only for you. It's not to, you know, then go and give to your mum or whatever, or whoever the party is. It's a letter for you, just to give yourself an opportunity to start getting back into the present moment and start slowly rewiring your mindset and letting go of things. And what we do when we do that is, once you've done the writing, is to kind of like find a little ritual. I often encourage people to burn the letters, because what we're doing is we've got this movie playing at the back of our minds, that whenever you see your mum, a play button is pressed. So the DVD of the past is playing and you're trying to be present with your mother. But because that DVD of the past is playing, it's creating emotions and feelings in your body that can sometimes then be transmitted without us even being aware that we're transmitting them. So sometimes you can recognize this when you go to one of your friends and you say to them, well, how are you? And they just go, fine. You know, they're not really fine. You can sense the energy behind it. And sometimes when we go into a situation like that and we have to see this person, we may be talking to them, but behind the words that we are talking, there's a lot of other stuff going on that we wish we could say, like, oh, fuck off, mum, fuck off, dad, or whatever it is. So we write that letter just to get it out. Sometimes when you start writing your letter, it can feel a bit unnatural, and you feel like you're saying things just to say things. But what I encourage people to do is to keep writing through that, and then the other emotion will come up. So I was walking with another client at the weekend. I saw him, and he was doing some work around a parent. And, you know, at first he was doing the writing and he's like, oh, I can't feel anything. You know, I feel like I'm just going through the motions. And I said to him, carry on, because you've got to get the surface level stuff out. Remember, when you've been talking to mum, it's been surface level stuff because you haven't wanted to say what's really going on. So our brain has got used to doing surface level stuff. When we start writing past that, eventually the brain gets more courage to write the real words. Sometimes people will just scribble at first because they're really angry, but then you get to it. And what this guy uncovered, and I know he won't mind me saying it because he said I could share it, was he got to a place where his kind of like core belief was, I'm just an orphan in this world because you abandoned me. And when he got to that, that was where his real kind of like emotion was. And when he did it and he burnt it, he said to me, I thought it would be a really silly thing. He says, but I felt such a huge relief that I'd finally said that, and that finally acknowledged that. And then once we've written the letter, we kind of like start looking at the bottom of it. So it's like, okay, well, what new things can I start saying to myself when I've dealt with this? And that, you know, mum doesn't get to me, and what new decisions could I make? And again, new ways, you know, how are you going to feel when you've dealt with this physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? Because sometimes what it does is, because it releases the emotion and the charge from it, we're able to be around that person without them pressing so many buttons, because we've taken back our power. And then when mum or dad or whoever it is treats us in a certain way, we are able to say, without all those unspoken words behind it, I'm not willing to tolerate this anymore, because you've taken back your power. And if you're going to continue to treat me this way, I'm going to back off a little bit. But sometimes when we have all that unspoken emotion, it's like, oh, well, you know, you just do this and you just do that and da, da, da. And we give the person more ammunition because we're reacting rather than responding. And it kind of like helps us to put, not necessarily, well, sometimes it helps us to put external boundaries in place, but it also, because I've taken back control of my mindset, I'm able to say, do you know what, this is not going to bother me anymore. If I want to withdraw, I am fully entitled to withdraw. One thing that I always say to people, it's not your fault that your family is your family, but it is your fault how you engage with them and allow them to treat you. But we are conditioned by society to say that we should respect our family regardless. And I'm not allowed to be rude to my mom, or I'm not allowed to distance my family from my family. I had a situation when I was younger. My mom had an elder sister, and my mom went into hospital for an operation, and she didn't want her sister to know. And I was listed as the next of kin to make a decision. So they thought that she had breast cancer. But because they didn't have the proper testing equipment, what they were going to do was they did the operation where they kind of like cut the boob, and they removed the growth, and then they tested it. And if it tested positive, I was the one that had to make the decision whether to do a mastectomy or not. Fortunately, it was benign, so they didn't have to do the mastectomy. But then when her sister found out, she went ballistic with me and said, who do you think you are? You shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And I made the decision at that age that I'm no longer going to see my aunt, because I refused to let her talk to me like that. And she was always putting me down, like comparing me to her son and that sort of stuff. And I got to the point, without realizing it, that I was going through this process where I was no longer going to tolerate it. It's like, yes, it's my aunt, but if every time I go there and she treats me a certain way, I'm not going to put up with it anymore. You know, I was old enough to deal with it, because even when she was sick, I used to go and visit her every week, and her own children wouldn't even go and visit her. So when she treated me that way, it's like, okay, this is how I'm physically going to deal with it. And this is how I'm mentally and emotionally and spiritually going to deal with it. Spiritually, it's not my fault that she's my family, but I don't need to let her treat me that way. And then at the bottom there, it's got there, like it says there, how will you know when you have come to terms with this? You know, will there be a sense of calm? Will you feel a sense of relief? Will you be able to communicate or whatever? And then looking back and seeing that you have dealt with this as best as you could up until now, what can you learn about yourself? Because a lot of times when we're in this situation where we have this trauma and this emotional abuse going on, we don't realize that we have dealt with it as best as we could, and you've got with it, and that means that you're a pretty strong person. So I look at a lot of the stuff, you know, and I've worked through it with my therapist, and I said, well, this is how my dad behaved, and this is how, you know, my mom's boyfriends behaved, and da 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 da. And because I was still struggling with it, I thought of myself as weak. And she said to me, well, look at yourself now. You're standing here now. You're comfortable with who you are. You're making a difference in other people's lives. What can you see about that? And it made me realize that getting through those things meant that I had strength. And I finally, you know, because a lot of people that have come to our retreat and that have met me, they always say to me, you're such a strong person. You're such a strong person. But I never saw that, because I was still struggling with this bubble inside of me. Once I had popped this bubble and dealt with this bubble, it's like, wow, in order for me to get through all those beatings and sexual and emotional abuse, I had to be pretty strong. I'm still here. Yes, I'm a little bit crazy now in the head, but that makes me who I am. But I've had a lot of strength to get me through that. So that's a kind of like a sheet that you can follow. And I would, you know, I would recommend spending some time doing with that around your mum, just to get it out of your bubble for you. Because once you've dealt with the emotions and the feelings, you can then start to look at it practically and say, okay, I have a choice. I can either see my mum and do my best not to let it bother me, or I can communicate with my mom and say, look, you know, this is not acceptable. But remember, we can't control the actions of others. So how she responds is entirely up to her. But you have a right to start, I'm pointing to it with my pen. You have a right to start changing how she treats you. And that starts with you going back, getting back into this bubble and taking back your power. Does that answer your question and help?
It helps a lot. Thank you very much. I'm going to do the letter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tash,
Yes.
do you have any questions on that?
I don't think so. No.
Can I share your story about your dad?
Yes.
So we've known Natasha a long time, and we did some coaching with her when we were still in London, and we were doing some work around her father. And whenever we spoke about her dad, Natasha would kind of like not break out in hives, but just go very, very red, and it made her quite shaky and all that sort of stuff. So he said to her, what would be, one of the things that she was afraid of was that she would bump into her dad. So we said to her, okay, we'll go away and do some writing and da 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 da, and just work on it that way. And then the next time we met up with her the following week, she sat down and she said to us, you'll never, and we said to her, what are the chances of you bumping into your dad? So she said, they're really minimal because he lives like far away or whatever it is. And we saw her the next week, and she said to us, she says, you'll never guess what happened. And we were like, no. She says, I think you walked out of a shop, and she walked straight into her father. And there was like a little bit of charge, but no charge. And I think now you're still in contact with your dad.
Yeah, I'm in contact with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a basic relationship, but I can now allow him to hug me.
Yeah.
Things, and not feel anything.
Yeah. Whereas before it was, before she did the process and we worked on it like through this process, it was one of her biggest fears. She's like, no, that can't happen. That's one of the worst things that could happen to me. So
yeah.
it is interesting kind of like how it can help. Let me press this.
So it's very, very, very deep process.
Yeah.
Doing this. No, as we've done it before, I do it with a few things, but obviously there's still a lot more to do.
Oh yeah, but like I said, like the ladder of self-awareness is never ending, but the more you do, the easier it becomes, because then you can look at it, our problems in life are not going to be fixed just like that, but we do become more aware, and these kind of things are easier to deal with. And then the last diagram, do you see the one on my screen now?
Yes, 8 steps to success.
Yeah, that's just something that you can kind of like go through in your own time, because it's got questions there. And this is the process that I like to use for helping me with forgiveness. We start with stopping, which is what you're kind of like, doing right now. You look at the situation, you pay attention to what is going on in your body, realize that forgiveness is more for you than the other person. When we don't forgive someone, where are the ones that are tying ourselves to their kind of like tail strings or whatever it is? We then take a critical review of it and look at, like some expectations, some boundaries, what influence it has over me. We reflect on it. We assess it for what it really is. We work on the forgiveness process, the releasing process, and that what we need to do after that is we start to redefine and refocus. So that's kind of like, once you've done the letters and that sort of stuff, there is also an element that you can go through this. It's like, okay, well, where am I? Are there other things? Because these questions might bring up other things that you need to write about. So all the questions are there as journal prompts, and it just gives you an insight into how we can start to kind of like release and forgive other people for this sort of stuff. So that is the review that I wanted to go through. What the fuck? Oh, stop share. Duh. that is the kind of like review that I wanted to go through with, to kind of like hopefully, because I know that the last session there was like a load of content, so it could have felt a bit overwhelming, and then with the echoes and all that. But what I can then start doing with this is, you know, give you some level of awareness. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Forgiveness was a really big step. The situation with my father.
Yeah.
Forgiveness for myself, but also forgiveness for him as well.
Yeah.
And just allowing him to be whatever it is that he is.
Yeah.
It's very different now, but yeah. But yeah, forgiveness was probably one of the biggest things. Writing the letter, burning the letter.
Yeah.
Burning the letter was just like massive. And then the process of forgiveness.
Yeah.
I've never seen forgiveness written out like this, so this is really quite good as a prompt for journals.
Yeah.
So, yes. An interesting week.
Any questions? Yeah, I think that it's good because you can like sit, you know, you can sit and chat with each other and say, okay, this is what it's brought up for me. Oh, can I just run downstairs?
Yeah.
Coming. Oh, thank you, Sue.
Ooh. Lots of things bubbly.
Yeah, that's some real good stuff.
There's some really, really good stuff in here. No, and tools that we can actually use.
I'm back. Sue's gone.
Who's gone?
Sue. You know Sue, the volunteer.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, she arrived yesterday because
Oh.
she's going to be helping us
Good.
like she always does. So any questions?
I don't think so. I'm going to read through it all again.
Yeah.
There's so many really good things in there for me. So many really good things. So many realizations. And I think some of the forgiveness stuff, when you were saying earlier about we don't share stuff because we don't want to be judged, but actually we're our own worst critic. So that really hit home for me because I thought, when I'm thinking, oh, I can't share stuff because people will think X, Y, Z of me, that's because actually I'm thinking that.
Yeah.
You should have done this, you should have done this. Why weren't you stronger? Why were you so weak? And I'm thinking, oh, people are going to think that about me, but actually, I'm already doing that, aren't I?
Yeah.
In my head, I'm already judge and jury of me.
Yeah. When we realize, like you know, like one of the big things with self-acceptance and self-compassion and that sort of stuff is we are our own worst critic. And because we don't deal with kind of like the what we're judging ourselves for, so later on in the process we start to take a look at like some of our flaws and some of our weaknesses. You know, I'm the one that sees those. You know, like, yes, sometimes some people may see a few of my weaknesses, but I'm the one that sees them all. And when I start to come to terms with them, I'm not so afraid of them. So it's almost like it doesn't matter if people find out that I feel weak sometimes, because I am stopping judging. It doesn't matter if I make mistakes myself, because I am stopping judging, saying that I have to get everything right.
Really,
And
it's a self-acceptance, isn't it?
yeah. But we've got to, that's why I like starting this from a negative point of view, is we're good at being negative. So let's use it to our advantage to uncover as much stuff as is ready to be uncovered now. Because then what happens is we're not so emotionally attached to it. So we can start seeing what's on the flip side of it and start releasing. So there is, that's why we're starting at the bottom of the ladder. It's like, okay, what are these beliefs and what are these anti-values that are really driving me? I was having a discussion with the client that we have at the moment, the private client. He's a ex-professional gymnast, and we were talking about the human body and how we need to start treating our body with respect, and how our body is going to communicate how we treat it. And he says, yeah, but I look after my body. And I said, well, think about it. I said, I've been a gymnast, and I've been like a semi-professional sports person, and I know what I put my body through. Is that truly accepting your body? And when he kind of like looked at it like that, I mean, is that truly respecting your body? And when he looked at it that way, he's like, wow, no. I said, there is a reason that people can only be sports people for a certain amount of time, because there's only so much pressure that their body can take. So when he got that, he started to realize, like, wow, and then he started to look at, he loves gymnastics, don't get me wrong, and I love gymnastics and diving, don't get me wrong. But when I start to look at it subjectively and objectively, it's like, wow, I am pushing my body to the limits. It's no wonder I have serious back problems now. It's because I wasn't on some level respecting my body. I wasn't listening to the pain my body was communicating. Because, when you're involved in sport like that, you are almost in constant pain. But you just say to yourself, that's part of being a gymnast. I've got to work on my flexibility. I've got to work on that. I've got to work on my strength. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. I've got to be prepared to fall and all that sort of stuff. So when we start to kind of like respect ourselves more, and know, okay, I have these weaknesses, but I'm not so afraid of them, then they lose their power. So it's part of the process.
Cool.
Thank you.
And you're both doing great. You have already in your own ways noticed some subtle shifts in kind of like your way of thinking and that sort of stuff. So it's good to remind yourself of that. It's like, no, things are shifting. And that's the important thing.
I haven't run away from you. No, we can't do that now, Gareth. We're still here.
Yeah, and also, like, I look at John, and he's getting some very interesting insights. And we're all gonna, you know, it's the ladder. It's like I said at the beginning, it doesn't matter if you don't get it straight away. And it's not like us comparing our journeys to each other. I think I said that right in the beginning, like it's a personal journey. But I like the fact, you know, Jerome and I can talk about it. But I like the fact that you three are together. You can, you know, you can have a debrief, you can chat about it and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, we do tend to.
Yeah.
After you've gone.
Good.
So yeah.
Well, on that note, I'm going back to my kitchen.
Are you?
Yeah, because we have a private meal to do tonight. I'm doing quite well. I'm doing 2 starters, a main, and 2 desserts. So I'm doing samosas, or whatever you call them.
Yeah.
And then I am doing, I can't remember the Indian name for it, but it's beetroot and potato and sweet corn and peas. So I'm doing like mini burgers.
Nice.
That's the starter. Then the main course is it's like a Sri Lankan brinjal salad, but it's warm. And then it's got roasted potatoes and crispy tofu. And dessert is mango cheesecake with a green tea gel and a banana and caramel parcel.
Just sounds gorgeous.
So I've got quite a few things to do. And fit an hour's nap in somewhere.
Good.
That's the most important part. The decadent.
Get the nap in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
good.
right. Well, happy cooking.
Thank you.
So share some pictures.
I will. I'll post.
I've heard about
Yes,
it.
we like food pictures.
Yes, we like food pictures on the group.
I'll
Just
post.
my own personal comfort zone.
Oh yeah, it's lovely. We
I'll
can't,
post.
it's nice to look at it.
I'll post some pictures in the group this evening when we're done.
Yeah.
Good.
Take care of you.
Take care. Thank you.
Love
See you
you.
soon. Take care. Love you too.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.